Our definition of an interface is the common boundary between two residentially segregated areas. In Belfast, that tends to mean the common boundary between what's been traditionally viewed as a Protestant, Unionist and Loyalist area and a Catholic, Nationalist and Republican area.
Many of them would be areas that are marked by barriers, by walls, fences of such like, and CCTV cameras. Some of them, though, are relatively invisible. They're bits of derelict land which act as a buffer between areas. Some of them just may be reliant on local knowledge, shops, open land, a particular house that marks the end of one area of territory and the beginning of another. If you go back to the early part of the 19th century, when industrialisation started to increase the population, until that time Belfast being predominantly a Protestant city, and it was as the Catholics moved in from rural areas to working in the linen mills and the like, they established their own territories.
You're also talking about, acute competition for jobs and housing, and it's in that kind of climate that the possibilities of sectarian division flourish. The first really serious riots take place in the 1830s. The riots get progressively worse throughout the 19th century. A feature of these periods of disturbance is the expulsion of the minority community in any particular area from that area. Catholics get burnt out or chased out of Protestant areas and vice versa. And so by 1886, when the disturbances were sufficiently serious, that the army had to be called in force, and we're talking about months of rioting, the army actually drew up a map to advise their soldiers of where the divisions lay. And they drew the frontiers. The places where they drew those frontiers matched almost exactly the places where the peace lines sprang up in our current troubles. Work has been done which shows that between the 1930s and 1969, the onset of the present Troubles, there was a very slow movement towards greater integration in housing. You could argue that that progress was wiped out within 2 years of the onset of the Troubles in 1969, and we actually established a more extreme pattern of residential segregation.
We're now left with a situation where the east of the city would largely be viewed as predominantly Protestant, Unionist and Loyalist, with some smaller populations of Catholics and Nationalists and Republicans, and also some migrant communities scattered throughout East Belfast, but largely it would be viewed as predominantly Protestant and Unionist. The opposite would be the case in West Belfast, where it would be viewed as predominantly Catholic and Nationalist and Republican, with again some exceptions, some small communities of Protestants and Unionists and Loyalists, and some small migrant communities too. So largely the city has been viewed as 1/4 of the city is predominantly Unionist, 1/4 of the city is predominantly Nationalist. The north of the city, I think, would be seen as much more of a patchwork quilt of interface communities and connecting arterial routes amongst them. And the south of the city would be viewed as fairly clearly demarcated in terms of Nationalist and Unionist areas, and perhaps with a larger middle class population. Interfaces have essentially been the site of much of the conflict. There's been quite a lot of studies that have shown that the prevalence of injury rises with proximity to an interface. The closer you live to an interface, the more likely you are to have experienced or witnessed the house.
This whole area here was in turmoil. The bricks, bottles, glass, you name it, came over here, you know, and these people had to suffer that. The house behind you there and the one next to it are owned by two old age pensioners, and we actually pleaded with her to come out of the house, and after pleading with her, we got her out, and within 2 hours the house was in flames at the back, and we had to go around with hoses and put them out ourselves because the fire brigade wouldn't come in.
We're here at one of the interfaces in North Belfast. This is the Limestone Road, and it actually sees a division of the communities where we have Tigers Bay, and it's just across the way from Newington and Parkside. And this was one of the more serious flashpoints going over the last 3 or 4 years in regards to the sectarian, the confrontations, which was a everyday fact of life for people who actually lived here. You can see, you know, that there's the empty houses, and there's the barriers and also the cameras. In the main, we would have young people coming in. So what we need to be doing is convincing those young people that they've no reason for to be here.
When I came here first, Workman's Avenue was open. So I found it very, very strange then when it actually happened that you couldn't sort of have access. Didn't really think about the people on the other side, what they thought of it, what actually did happen to them, because then they were stopped from coming onto the Springfield Road.
Before the wall went up, when you worked in Mackey's and you were able to walk through, you were able to go to the post office and pay your housing executive rent. You were able to go down and get your groceries, your greengrocers, the co-op for your groceries, the butchers, wee drapery shop, you know, and your cards and candles and all. I shopped more on that Springfield Road when my boys were young than I did on the Shankill Road. But when the wall went up, you can't get out.
The street that I lived in, Mackey's workers obviously had to come through. When it was the old Mackey's on Springfield Road further down, they had to come through the streets on the way to and from work, and they got dogs abuse from some of my neighbours. It was horrific for me, and unfortunately, as I said, having children, I mean, my children were made sort of aware of this. I mean, I couldn't shame them from that point of view.
Well, this is Madrid Street. These are some of the houses that have been vacant over the years that ended up people moving out of them, just couldn't live in them because of the hassle was happening. That's the interface, that's the peace line, but that's where all the stuff from Clune Place and all first started. It started off here, kicked off here one night. We eventually got a peace wall and gates and that there, which give these people a better sense of security. And now, once we've got that done, we're able to move on with the next phase of building walls and redeveloping the whole area.
We're in Alexander Park. This is part of Limestone Parkside, and this is an interface that we're on actually. This was really bad during the drum craze there in the 2000s. A lot of the trouble occurred here in the park between the two sides. When the wall actually went up, it was really, really strange, because I remember playing here, you know, as a child myself, and being able to run from one end to the other.
We're actually standing here at the junction of North Queen Street and Brome Street, which is the interface between Tigers Bay and the New Lodge Road. And this area, again, had seen some of the worst confrontation in the last 6 or 7 years. A young man actually died there at the lights in a bomb explosion. And right behind me here, you can see a 20 to 25 foot fence, which actually was installed. People had moved into their new houses in 1998, and 2 years later, we actually had to see that this fence had to be built. People had come up with ideas to build a permanent wall. We had said no, that what we wanted was a railing as such, or a fence as such, so that in time to come, where we would see a future, is that they're easily removed. Also, what the people here live with, and this is a reality, is triple glass for their windows, steel oil tanks to ensure that any petrol bombs can't ignite the plastic tanks themselves.
I lived first of all on the Woodville Road, at the top of the Woodville Road. I was put out of that house by paramilitaries. My windows were broken every weekend. At that particular time I had 3 children and they never got out onto the road to play or nothing. They always played in the back garden. So for 15 years we sat on the Woodville Road until a rocket was fired one night and blew part of the house out. We then moved, naturally, along with most of the residents in that area. We ended up a few houses in Twaddale Avenue on the Peace Line. I've been there for the last, 15 years, and we're still getting a bit of hassle, but not as bad as it used to be. I'm unable to park my car outside my own home. It has to be parked further down Twaddale Avenue. I've already lost 3 cars, being completely wiped out through these vandals. We have one of the best communities in Northern Ireland. The people are fantastic. Quite a lot of pensioners live in this area, and they're the nicest neighbours and people I've ever met in my lifetime, and that's why I'll not move out.
At one stage we were thinking of selling and moving away, but we were informed that nobody really wanted to buy our property, and that's the way we were left. We either were left with in a situation where you sort of made the best of it, stayed and made the best of it, and that's just what we did.
There's been quite a lot of research that's been carried out on interfaces and interface communities, and basically the research seems to show that people who live in interface communities are characterised by 3 kinds of disadvantage. The first is what you might think of as common or garden social and economic disadvantage. So people who live in interfaces are more likely to be unemployed, more likely to have a lower standard of educational achievement, less likely to own their own house or car. The standard indicators of social and economic disadvantage. The second is that people who live along interfaces are more likely to have experienced extremes of violence and to be living with the legacies of violence, sometimes extremes of trauma. And the third is that people who live in interface areas typically report that they have difficulties in accessing facilities and services, particularly where those facilities and services are on the other side of an interface. And that's a particular difficulty for people who live in enclave communities or island communities, where their community is essentially surrounded by the other community, and so they would feel that many of the facilities and services are in territory that they would feel unsafe to access.
When you do think about it, I would actually like to live on their side of the gate, because they are really restricted in an awful lot of things. I mean, mostly the worrying thing is it's the fire brigade and the ambulance. They cannot get. I mean, if someone in the very first house or the very second house of Workman Avenue, closest to the Springfield Road end, if they had to go to the hospital or the house was on fire, the fire brigade from the Springfield Road has to do a detour right the whole way round to actually get to the house.
When tensions rise, or if there are trouble, then undoubtedly affects the quality of life they have in their homes, how they're able to go about their normal business. That for me is the main aspect of living on an interface area, and the impact that difficulties will have on residents who live there. It's really the quality of life that they actually experience when tension runs high, or if there are trouble in a particular area.
I think you can witness kind of a lack of good either physical or mental health in areas like this. And one of the things is, I know because there's been such high levels of violence in this area, that even now when there's been no violence maybe for a few years, people are always still on their nerves in terms of expecting violence. And we've heard stories of some of the women we work with or some of the children in after schools that the slightest noise at night would have children and young people up quite distressed because they have been witnesses to a lot of violence in the area. So I would say that the mental health of people living in areas like this isn't good.
The stress is a big factor for many people in our area, and it manifests itself in all different ways. Domestic violence, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, sick, people being sick, you know, physically and psychologically.
People get very frightened coming up to the 12th because of the parades and stuff like that there, and it creates a lot of tension in nationalist areas. I mean, on the 11th night we were out from 5 o'clock really because of the potential of renting. The houses here to the left of us on the opposite side of Dunkirk Gardens have always every year to take precautions. It's frightening for them.
People want to feel secure in their homes. And if they don't feel secure, it preys on their mind.
The reality is this: the Troubles are over, but we're still dealing with the aftermath of the Troubles. So there is an emotional residue, there is a residue in terms of the actual physical barriers that exist within and between our communities, and also there is the legacy of difficult social and economic circumstances which the Troubles have thrown up. And so people are dealing with and coping with the legacy of the Troubles, and that can be very difficult because although the Troubles are over for most people, they still continue in a shadow form for people living in the interfaces, particularly in North Belfast.
Psychologically, I think it's very, very difficult to live in that kind of area. But also, if you look at the areas of interface across the city, then environmentally, those areas are also pretty grim. And so it's that kind of combination of having the psychological problems of being and living in tension, but also having the physical surroundings and the environmental issues around you, which are not pleasant either. So it doesn't make for, I think, the best of living conditions.
%70 of Western illness is stress related. The symptoms have originated from stress that was never dealt with. A lot of people don't realise the emotional stresses that they're under because it just becomes a way of life. And if it becomes a way of life, they just take it as normal until they start working with it.
Survivors of Trauma was set up in 1995 by families that had lost loved ones in the conflict. There was nothing for us. There was no help for the families.
The core aim of the organisation is to provide therapies and a counselling service. And basically what stems off from that is a range of different programmes and activities. What we say here is people need to deal with their trauma in their own way, and they need a safe place to do so.
When a person comes in, the therapist will do a consultation. So the treatment will depend on the consultation. We have obviously the aromatherapy massage, which I'm doing at the minute. There's deep tissue massage, there's head massage, there's reflexology, there's kinesiology, and I do homeopathy. It's amazing seeing the effects, especially, you know, if the person's a complete skeptic and thinks this is all mad, and then suddenly goes, no, this is great. Why didn't I do this years ago?
The support mechanisms that we have in place here, we're encouraging people and supporting them as they move through the process of engaging and reintegrating themselves back into society. So we're talking about people who, you know, have been faced with isolation, social exclusion and things like that. So if we're providing a service that's giving them a channel to come back into that, then it can impact on their lives in different ways. Now, if you're talking about therapies, you know, that's people dealing with what they've suffered. They're trauma related, or feeling stressed out or whatever. But the other programs, it can be something as simple that it's encouraging someone to get out of the house. It's improving their interaction with other people and building up their confidence and self-esteem.
We had been in the centre and then we moved out to get renovations, and then we come back in again in 2001, and we had talked about what we would do. So we come up by the memorial park, and it didn't suit everybody. I mean, there was some people just didn't agree with it, didn't think it was the right thing to have Catholics, Protestants, soldiers, policemen all in the one memorial. But it's just somewhere to remember people as they were.
Personally, myself, I have 4 members of my family on their names on the wall here, and some photographic in the exhibition here. I can come in here, and if I want to sit and say a prayer or light a candle, I can do it. You can sit as long as you want here. It's very therapeutic.
Twaddown Woodville Rest Association was set up 15 to 20 years ago. It was set up in respect of the people in the area regarding housing needs, security, problems regarding benefits and so forth. And that is the aim of the association.
The group organises excursions to other parts of Northern Ireland, mainly across the border. We go to different communities, and we have met certain people in Drogheda and up in Derry. We just sort of try and bring the two communities together by meeting each other and sitting down and having coffee or whatever it is, and discussion between the two groups.
I think acknowledgement of the past is part of this process. We carry the past along in ourselves. We fortify each other's memories. We need to correct each other's memories as well as to, respect each other's memories. If we can incorporate the other's memory into our memory, we then have something closer to the memory of a country. And that is an important, I think, political rule, that a political community depends upon a certain degree of common memory.
People growing up separately means that they don't know each other. People growing up separately means that they dehumanize each other to the point of hatred. And that's where our conflict was able to grow and be nurtured for the last 35 years, because people didn't know each other. They dehumanized each other to the point of hatred. We need to rehumanize each other. We need to bring people together so that they get to know each other, they can look each other in the eye, they can compare notes on deprivation, if you like, because deprivation's the same no matter who suffers it.
Force Spring has just recently celebrated its 10th anniversary, so we've been going for over 10 years now. It actually grew out of a partnership of groups that have been working on the road for a lot longer. The primary purpose of Force Spring is about creating a centre where Catholic and Protestant people can meet in an area where they are separated by a wall and generally wouldn't meet each other at all. So the centre's very much about people coming together and that contact, but also it's about, once we have people in together, actually being involved in programmes to get to know each other much more and create a better understanding of where the two communities are coming from. At the very beginning, probably the trust wasn't there for people to be able to talk about those difficult issues in an open and honest way. So people kind of removed themselves a bit. 2 years ago, during the White Rock Parade, which caused probably the most severe rioting that there had been for a number of years, we came back in thinking some people might actually decide to walk away from us as a cross-community project. But because we had been working so long with people at that stage, there was an openness and a trust that people actually were able to sit down and talk about what had happened.
Well, I joined Force Spring Group 4 years ago, and I have had a very good experience with the group. I got on very well with everyone in the group, from both sides of the community.
I think it's just the nature of the job.
I came here and this is like a family to me, you know, a second family, and we're all mixed. It's from both communities, from both sides of the wall. And we all worry about each other. If one's sick, there's mass cards sent, or there's a wee flower sent, or a wee card sent. You know, there's no such a thing as a divide. That wall's there for you to see, but in our hearts there's no wall.
I would say probably the biggest success of Force Spring is just about bringing Catholic and Protestant people together. And that when two individuals or two groups of people come together and start seeing each other as human beings, then a lot of those stereotypes, myths, prejudices that they've grown up with actually fall away. And we've talked about quite often, and I'm no different to people living in this community, I didn't meet people from the other side of the community until I was 18, is what I learnt about the other side was from my community. And for the first time, people are actually learning about the other community from the other community. And over the 10 years, and it's been slow, I think one of our successes is seeing real and genuine friendships developed between Catholic and Protestant people, whether that's young people, children, or some of the women. So I would see that as our biggest impact and kind of most positive impact.
I suppose the worrying thing about the nature of interfaces in the last 10 years or so has been the fact that they become normalised. A lot of the new barriers that are going up are built with much more substantial materials than the previous ones. They're not ugly green sheet steel so much as more elaborate brickwork and iron and decorative and features and so forth. And therefore they're built with a sense of permanence about them. I think that government should take a decision to not build any new barriers anywhere in Belfast or any parts of Northern Ireland. It's not the sort of solution that would be taken if this situation was in Dublin or if it was in Manchester or Birmingham. Building a barrier is not a long-term solution. It might have worked as a crisis management in the past, but it's not something that we should continue to use. I think we've become reliant on the use of barriers as a means and as a sort of fatality about the sense that the barriers have got to remain. And there needs to be a debate going about how we remove the barriers and how we start to think about taking them down, what criteria would be considered to be necessary to take a barrier down, how we get to that stage, what sort of resources need to go into interface areas to make them more amenable and more approachable.
I think the government should actually invest a little bit more money in these areas. Money's not always a saviour, but also the government and the MPs and councillors should be in these areas talking to people on a regular basis, not sitting at Stormont.
Working within the community and voluntary sector, I mean, it's always about the funding and the short-termism of funding, you know, that I suppose that's a gripe of myself and many other people that work in the community, that it's always something that we're chasing. And it's quite difficult to plan long-term when you've got so much short-termism in relation to the funding.
Every time you ask to fill in a funding application, they're asking about reconciliation and all things. I don't know what it's like for other areas of Belfast, but in this area, there's an awful lot of the reconciliation has to go on within their own community. You know, and it's not all about people getting together and talking, because whatever changes have to come with yourself, I mean, with one person, and it has to be something that starts within you, and not like, all right, we'll all go to a meeting together and be all nice to each other, because that's not reconciliation.
I'd like to see them be a bit more flexy with their questions, because after all, we didn't ask to become victims of the violence. You know, this was put upon us.
In terms of politicians, we probably had quite good support from some of our politicians in terms of promoting the work that we're doing and promoting the ethos of a shared future. But I would also say that there are other politicians and also other aspects of the government that I think genuinely believe that it's better and easier to keep two communities, keep them separate, and as long as actually there's no violence, then there's no need for the communities to come together. In some ways, I think because the police have been used to policing two separate communities, politicians are used to just being politicians for their community. It's easier for some of them to just keep the two communities apart.
It's important that we don't fall into the trap of assuming that the job of peace building on the ground is no longer needed. And in many interface areas, people are reporting that they're hearing from government agencies, but surely that isn't needed anymore. Surely the war is over. You don't need to do that work. We don't need to help to support you to pay the cost of those mobile phones, for example. And we would feel very strongly that that work is going to need to be supported for some time to come. Those people who live in enclave communities and in the past have experienced difficulties in terms of stepping outside their community to use a local library or go to the local pub or use a local health centre or get on the local bus. A lot of those people would still have those same difficulties. And in terms of levels of unemployment, I'm not aware of recent figures that show that there has been a massive reduction in unemployment in those interface communities. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
People have got long memories, and that's unfortunate. But it's about positively and actively building relationships, building understanding, whereby the people themselves, I don't believe it should be up to me as a public representative or as up to government even. I think it should be down to the people who live there, because first and foremost it's about their security and it's about them feeling secure and as I say, it's almost gotten trendy now to say take the walls down. You know what I mean? Take the walls down. They're a scar. They're a scar on the landscape, and that's fair enough. I accept all those points, but at the same time, if you know people who live on those areas, they'll sleep at this stage, and hopefully we can get to the stage where it won't be the case. But they go to sleep at night far easier knowing that those walls exist.
We were having ongoing trouble up in the mountain road there beside Ballygomartin and Moyard, and we were lobbying to get some sort of fence erected there, and basically we were told by the NIO that that's all in the past and there not be anything there about taking walls down rather than putting walls up, which is a sentiment which I would agree with, but we have to deal with reality here that there are still massive issues around interfaces, that we're only coming out of a prolonged and protracted conflict, and I think for people to turn around and say that everything's done and dusted is a nonsense. There's an ongoing need to look at interfaces and interface issues.
It's only those people who live in interfaces that know what they have to contend with and put up with. Throughout the summer here there have been attacks, and those attacks have continued over the last few years since I've been elected. And they're, unfortunately, I think are happening on a more regular basis. And they seem to be much more vicious in terms of the attack. So you can understand that those people are living in fear and trepidation all the time about their just ordinary daily lives. And something that the rest of us take as being normal, as going out and playing, children playing in the garden, sitting in the garden on a summer's day, going out for a walk with a dog. That all can't happen here on a regular basis because these people are facing continual attack.
I think over the last couple of years they've put a time limit on things, right, with 5 years, let's get all this fixed up. You know, it's 30 years when they've done nothing about it, you know, and you can't expect people, like within 5 years, just to jump to whatever's calling the tune. I think reconciliation will come, but it's a very slow thing, and to say it's for people probably who've been affected the most, who have the longest journey. I think people want to make it better too quick. You know, like, rather with 5 years, let's get this sorted out. I mean, it could be another 30 years before it's sorted out.
I still believe there is too much distrust between the two communities. It will take a long time for the healing to start. What I would say is, it would take the two communities to start talking together and communicating with one another, and to try and build a trust for the walls to come down.
Probably still too early to take it down, but you know, I'm sure anybody looking at it, it's a bloody eyesore, you know. Nobody wants to be caged in, whether you're on this side or the other side, and that's just basically what people felt it was like.
The people I've talked to from this end do want the wall, do want to get down. We are in talks at the minute through this group. We have had politicians in talking to them about you know, what process that we could actually go with. There's a side entrance to the gate at the minute, and it's open between certain times. One of the suggestions was that maybe that the gate could be left open for longer. I think that would be something to start off with, and obviously there's a wall there, and I would like to see it eventually coming down.
It is down to talking and down to let people have their own cultures and get back to the way the pre-Trouble area, 1968, 1966, when I lived in peace and harmony with my Catholic friends and my neighbours, because we had mixed communities, but even mixed communities on the Shanker Road, which some people didn't know about. And yes, I think it will come back within 10 years, hopefully. I pray it will come back for my grandchildren to be able to have a better life.
I want to see it taken down. Should it be a penny a brick, I want to see it taken down. So I do. And I want something constructive done for my part of the community and the part of the community on the other side that want to live with us and live with me and enjoy my company. I want to see that wall down.
Our society has improved substantially over the past number of years, and that progress is bound to percolate through even to interface areas. And I'm very confident that we can gradually eliminate the problems that exist in these areas, and I think we do that by building up trust and confidence between the communities, not just at a local level, and I've referred to that before, but also at a macro level. Because if you see politicians from different sides of the community, particularly in the DUP and Sinn Féin, working together in government, in partnership, then that must send a very powerful message into the very heart of the community. Because people living in the very heart of the community must be impressed by the political progress being made at a higher level. So I think that that will impact positively on local communities.
It will actually take a prolonged period of secure peace and the realization that political accommodation has been possible not only at Stormont but on the ground before peace lines, the most extreme manifestation of division, can begin to come down.
And I think you need to start thinking creatively about how we open the spaces up and the environments up. There's lots of roads which are still closed, which don't need to be. There's lots of barriers there which don't necessarily serve the same function as they used to. And I think we need to start thinking about how we can move away from that level of segregation.
So long as we're insulated, segregated, otherwise apart from the people we don't like or that we oppose, we don't have a basis for peace with them because we don't understand them. And we can't respect their differences when we don't even know what those differences are. And therefore, I think a country like Northern Ireland has some progress to make along that line. But I think in your new political arrangements, you have some new ability, at least through negotiation and dialogue, to appreciate the points of view of the other folk, and maybe to break down some of the segregations that have separated people in this country for a long time.
I think that we are at this moment turning a corner. I think that we are beginning to say this is something we have to face and something we have to talk about together. And I think that's a good sign. Now, I'm not saying there are too many signs where we're getting that talk and we're starting to say let's dismantle the interface, let's look at different ways of doing it. But it seems to me it's a positive sign that we're moving to have these kinds of conversations and that communities are beginning to think there is a possibility of a day when a wall might come down, when an interface problem might be resolved. So it's a very slow process, but it seems to me it has moved incrementally in the right direction.
The concept of using an interface as a conflict management tool appears to be a concept that is now being taken up in different countries around the world. And within the last 2-3 years, we've seen a massive building of interface walls in Israel and Palestine. I think it's important that we use the opportunity that we have here to not just set a model to the rest of the world in terms of how to build walls, but we have an ideal opportunity here to set a model, to give a model to the rest of the world in terms of how to begin to answer the question, what might we do in order to bring those walls down?